Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream for the History Valley podcast. Today, I'm joined by frequent guests of the channel, Dr. Robert M. Price, and today we're going to be talking about different translations of the New Testament. Which one is the most accurate that we have, and which one is the worst that we have, in the opinions of Dr. Price? So, Dr. Price, why are there so many different versions of the New Testament?
Well, I hate to suggest it, but it may be to make a buck off the endeavor, because there's a ready market of people that pretty much collect different Bible translations, though that's not to say they don't use them. It's kind of a fascinating exercise to uh, compare different translations. It's sort of a shortcut to what one might do when puzzled by a passage, and you're moved to consult different commentators and see what they make of it. In a way, it's kind of a quick, easy access version of that, since every translation is at the root a kind of an interpretation. It's never simply a one-to-one correspondence. And so it's fascinating, and I think a real good idea for those who want to really zero in on the possible meanings of a verse that is ambiguous, or for all you know, might mean other things than you have heard. And so I've always found it very enjoyable as well as edifying to compare my favorite versions. Now, this is interesting in that if you're a big Bible fan, as many people are, even if you're a Bible believer, some sort of literalist, it's almost like more of a good thing. You love the Bible, and what? You mean there's more than one? In one sense, you'd say, no, there's not, of course, but there's a bunch of versions of the Bible. Wow, I'd like to compare them. And there is, at the same time, a kind of a hesitancy on the part of some for a very understandable reason. If you've ever heard of people that believe in King James only, and similarly those who will brook other translations, but it has to be from the Byzantine textual family upon which the King James Bible was based. What is going on there? Why do they accord such high priority to a single translation, and in particular a difficult one because of the archaic nature of the language? Like the King James version, the language there was antiquated even in 1611 when it was produced. So what is the attraction of that? Well, you sometimes read really far-fetched excuses like this sounds like a joke, and ultimately it is, but apparently there are some people that actually think that the Bible, the King James Version, was written as such in the time of the Bible, that they're reading the original. The joke being, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. And as I say, even among fundamentalists, that's a joke. And yet you kind of get the impression there's an element of truth, at least that's what some people think. Now, why? Why would they have such an obviously arbitrary view? Well, actually, that's not difficult to fathom, because this is less true now as time goes by. But when in the 1950s and early 60s, when there were more and more translations available, people that were raised on the King James Bible felt threatened. They felt like, well, wait a minute, as far as I'm concerned, the King James Bible, my Bible, is the Bible. My beliefs are based on what it says and the wording in it. I think there's something possibly undermining about the idea that you can have not only a modern language version that gets rid of the these and thous and other archaisms, but where the basic ideas are expressed differently, like a paraphrase. So they begin to understand what Muslims say. You know, that Muslims say that the Quran is the word of God, and in fact is the Quran only if you're reading it in Arabic. So they don't oppose translations, but if you look at the published translations of the Quran, they're always named in a kind of I want to say a circuitous way, like the meaning of the glorious Quran or the Quran interpreted. They mean that. They're saying, like, all right, you don't speak Arabic, but you should have access to the inspired message. All right, this is second best, but it's not bad. That's what fundamentalists who accept only the King James version are in effect saying. They don't have really a theological or a logical rationale. It's kind of sentiment, right? This is the Bible I learned to trust, so for me it is the Bible. And if you come up with some new book, the Revised Standard Version, the Living Bible, Good News for Modern Man, whatever, and it is different from what I cherish and what I have memorized, well, there's a couple of things they don't like about that. They don't like textual criticism, for one thing, because compared to modern critical versions, and by that I mean Bible translations based on earlier manuscripts of the Bible from hundreds of years earlier than the ones they had available when they did the King James version. If you read it and suddenly you're saying, "Hey, wait a minute, one of my favorite verses is gone. What happened?" Like it may be in the footnotes, but that's not good enough. Like the woman taken in adultery in John, it's not there, because if you look at the ancient manuscripts, it pops up in a couple of different places in John and in Luke. And then in some old manuscripts, you don't have it at all. Well, it's pretty obvious to textual critics that that's because it's a secondary piece that somebody felt like a preachers sometimes say, it ain't in the Bible, but it ought to be. And so some ancient scribes said, hey, this is too good not to include. And you can see their point. Well, there are a lot of little things like that. Did Jesus say from the cross, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do? That's pretty important, but it's not in some copies of Luke. Or the Son of Man came to save men's lives, not to destroy them. Also, I believe in Luke. Was that in the original? We can't tell, because with those and many like them, there's about as much manuscript support on either side. So it's really a toss-up. And keep in mind, fervent Bible readers believe that whatever it says is the living, infallible Word of God. It's not somebody's opinion. It's not just my opinion. This is what Jesus said. This is what God inspired. And you're telling me it might not be part of the Bible and that we can't really tell? You can see how that would be upsetting to a biblicist. And likewise, the other big issue, if there are many renderings, many possible translations, even if they're not radically different, if you're reading it in the New American Bible or the Jerusalem Bible or the Revised Standard, it's not going to read quite the same way. Usually it'll have the same basic upshot to it, but that introduces an element of ambiguity that the casual Bible reader never thought was there. I mean, had they thought about it a bit, which they, not stupid, but just never had occasion to think about it, they're saying, well, this is one way of reading the text, but there are other ways. How am I to know which possible interpretation is the correct one? And if that's the case, a biblical ambiguity is really no better than a biblical error, right? If I'm not sure what the heck it means, it might as well not even be there, because the only reason I'm reading this book is to settle questions I have that mere human wisdom could not arbitrate. And so there it becomes theologically and psychologically very disturbing to some people. But this is less and less true, just to bring this back to where I started, with the more recent generations who seem to realize this from the outset and say, well, look, if I they can't be that different. I'll pick one I feel more at home with, and I figure that's got to be as close as I'm going to get anyway. Or you might compare them and say, well, maybe this one will show me a nuance that one didn't, and the more the merrier. So there are plenty of people, maybe most people now, even among evangelicals and fundamentalists, who do not have a problem. But there sure were a lot of them who did. Like when the Revised Standard Version New Testament was published, I believe first in 1945, there were book burnings of it. I mean, this wasn't like Hitler book burnings, but it wasn't that different. Why? Because they said you're leaving out part of the Word of God, and in a sense they were right. It was an undermining of their rather rigid view of it. So there's a big undercurrent of controversy. But if you're one of us who welcome all the different translations, that you're willing to accept the ambiguity, which one's the best? And my feeling is that I would like it. I mean, I can read it in the Greek, though not the Hebrew, and I have done that. I've done my own translation, the Pre-Nicene New Testament. But before I did that, I enjoyed reading the different ones to see what were the options, and sometimes they're quite different. And so even at that, my preference is for the most literal that I can get. And there's several that are related that would all pass muster. Like I personally usually use the old Revised Standard Version. There have been other revisions of it, including the celebrated New Revised Standard Version, but I tend not to like that because there are what I would call politically correct paraphrases to try to remove certain like let's say microaggressions in the Bible. Like you're reading along in the Pauline epistles, and it says, "To the brothers and sisters in Philippi." Hey, it doesn't say "and sisters." Why would you add that? Well, I think just because if that is being read to a church congregation, they don't want anybody to feel left out. And doesn't it stand to reason that Paul had congregations with men and women? We know that he did. So why not adjust it? Well, I don't go for that, because if somebody notes that it only says brethren and not sisters, and they say, what were these guys chauvinistic? Yeah, I would rather know that they were than just gussy it up. I would rather see the Bible warts and all. I don't want to make an idol of the Bible. I would like to see its shortcomings as much as I want to see its many great things. So I don't like it when things are paraphrased to make them go down smoother. So I like the Revised Standard Version and its cousin, the New American Standard Version. And there are, and so they're rather literal. There are other cousins in the same family tree, I think. However, I'm not so familiar with them. Like, I gather the English Standard Bible is a yet another slight revision, and that there are various other ones, and I am not familiar with them all. There are too many to keep up with. But that family of traditions that are all essentially revisions of the King James with better manuscripts and more modern language, but they don't just start from ground zero and do a new translation. Now, that's another bunch of them, like the New American Bible, which is a Roman Catholic version, the Jerusalem Bible, same thing again, the New English Bible, done by a bunch of different Protestant groups in the United Kingdom, and others. These are all conciliar translations, where you have a whole bunch of scholars working together. And the New International Version would be another one of those. And they figure, well, if we have a bunch of scholars working on this, we're liable to weed out any eccentricities, any idiosyncrasies, and get everybody to agree. And I suppose on the whole, that's not a bad idea. But they do start from ground zero and do a new, fresh translation. My what I like about that is it's kind of like reading a commentary. The fact that someone has put it in different wording altogether, it might occur to you, oh, I see what you're getting at here. I never thought of it, like in the Zacchaeus story, where Jesus shocks the crowds by saying to Zacchaeus, this Roman collaborator, hey, Zach, come on down. I got an appointment to have dinner with you today. And they're all shocked. This guy works with the Romans. You're granting your time to him? And he says, hey, Zacchaeus says, look, I'm not what you think. If I find I've overcharged people, I pay them back 4 times over. And what I have left, I give half of it to the poor. And Jesus says, you see, this man is a true son of Abraham. Well, in the New American Bible, it's almost the same, but it says, for this is what it means to be a son of Abraham. Interesting. I never, that's a slightly different spin on it that makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of that. So I like looking at the New American Bible. Sometimes, however, it's really very different, but the more the merrier. It's like reading a commentary, and it's loads of fun comparing them. Now, finally, there are many solo translations, J.B. Phillips being the most famous one, Ronald Knox, various others, where you have a single authorial or translational voice. Here's what I make of it. And with this, you've got to ask yourself, would it be better if this guy had compared notes with other people? Am I just getting some kind of spin on it? Well, once again, there's plenty of them to compare, and for my sake, I love J.B. Phillips and his idiomatic style. I don't happen to care much for the bland style of Kenneth Taylor in the Living Bible, and that seems like way too loose for me. But it kind of depends on what it is you want from the Bible. Is it casual reading? Is it close study? The different Bibles that are appropriate, and why not? The more the merrier. If you got a few bucks and some shelf space, it can be fun and edifying. So those are my favorites. The Revised Standard Version, the New American Standard Version, and on the looser side, the New American, New English, and Jerusalem Bible. However, one other thing that makes it a little more complex, there are several revisions of these Bibles. There is now a New Jerusalem Bible and a Revised English Bible instead of New English, and a New American Bible. I'm not even familiar with those, so I can't really pose as the expert. But I say, let 100 flowers bloom.
When you look at the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, do they typically contain shorter versions of the canonical books that we have?
Well, all modern translations are a bit shorter because they have to. I'm sorry, well, they're a bit shorter in that they're using more ancient texts, and it's been estimated that the King James Bible is about a page and a half too long if you subtract all the stuff we know are later additions. Most modern ones, as I say, leave those out. So some manuscripts are longer than our official Bibles, but some I'm sorry, are shorter. I'm not with it today because there's less manuscript to work from. But others might be a bit longer because they're unafraid to put things in more complex, or to do a little more explaining. Like a very good Bible that I like a lot, New Testament anyway, is William Barclay's New Testament, where he doesn't mind paraphrasing things and adding some words in there that are implied that the reader would have understood, but the ancient reader would, but the modern reader might not. For instance, the thing with no one puts new wine into old wine skins lest the skins burst and you've lost them and the wine. What is going on there? Well, the ancient reader would have known that the leather bottles, so to speak, for wine have expanded as the wine fermented, but they've expanded as much as they're gonna. And so if you finish that wine and you say, well, I think, my old faithful wine skin, I'm going to put the new wine in there. Don't do it, because the new wine hasn't finished expanding. And when it does, pop goes the weasel. Well, he throws in a couple of extra adjectives: old, unshrunk, etc., skins. And there are a number of places there where you say, oh, now I get it. He doesn't really go very far from the text, but he does occasionally. And any paraphrasing version is liable to add a bit. So could be a bit longer than the actual more terse ancient manuscripts. But I don't guess there's a whole lot of difference in length.
How extensively does the King James Version modify the Bible?
Well, there's such a thing as the New King James Version, and that's a good one to put under the microscope, because they realize that you shouldn't have to take a course in 17th century English to read the Bible, though I understand there are some Bible schools that do that. But the people that put the New King James together said, let's just modernize the language. And so people will understand it without having to beat their brains out with dictionaries and such. But as to the translated text, they believe that the Byzantine text type that was used for the King James is the best one. That's a minority view among scholars. I mean, a tiny minority view, because like there were different lines of transmission, different copyist traditions in different parts of the Roman Empire. Like you wouldn't, if you were replacing your church's old copy because it had been worn out, you're not going to go shopper, and you're in Alexandria, you're not going to go over to Asia Minor to get a new one. and vice versa. You would use more recent copies in your neighborhood, and as a result, these manuscripts would evolve slightly. If there were errors, just innocent copyist errors in the one that wore out and that you're recopying, you don't necessarily know they are errors, and you go right ahead and copy them into the new copy. And then the next guy does the same thing. And after some centuries, if this has been going on in different places in the Roman Empire, you're going to have different textual traditions, different manuscript families that have similar readings. That is, like a bunch of them will have Father forgive them, they know not what they do, but a bunch will not. And it's because what was available to the copyists, the scribes at the time. And the Byzantine text, so-called, was the longest. It accumulated more barnacles on the hull in the process of copying than the Western text used in Egypt and Rome and so on, I think. And the Alexandrian text, they're a bit different. And so what modern critical Bibles do is to compare as many manuscripts as you can, or photocopies, whatever, from all over the ancient world, both in the original language and in the various translations. So you have thousands of whole or part New Testament manuscripts to compare. This is why Bart Ehrman, Gordon Fee, Bruce Metzger, all these text critics really have their hands full, and because there's a lot to compare, and but that they've made a science of it, and I gotta say, in favor of fundamentalists, some of the most important early text critics were fundamentalists. Like one or two of them were members of the Plymouth Brethren sect, which is about as fundamentalist as you can get. To their credit, they figured, hey, we believe in verbal inspiration. The very words, one way or another, have been inspired by God, so we better make darn sure we've got the right words. And so they wanted to weed out copyist errors if they could. Others didn't even hold that view of Scripture, but they figure, well, don't we want to read what it originally said? And so for centuries, they've been doing textual criticism, and it's still not an open and shut case. But as Bart Ehrman points out, and so do conservatives, that the great majority of differences between the text are ridiculously insignificant. Like somebody misspelled a word and it's obvious. Oh, they left out an iota, or somebody obviously came to the end of a line, copied it, and then looked down for the next, for where he stopped so he can resume. But unfortunately, his eye fell a little below where he stopped to another line that ended with the same word, and he picks up from there and inadvertently leaves out a line or two. Well, it's pretty obvious when that's happened. There's no great mystery, and it's easy to weed that out. So there's a lot of little differences, but there do remain a few theologically significant ones, but there's not much debate about them anymore.
We got a few super chats, so let's take a look at them. Jacob B. says many scholars recommended the RSV and RSV Bibles. Oxford annotated, HarperCollins. Hector Avalo said that a parallel is best. The JPS Tanakh seems best for Old Testament. I like the Net Bible, filled with notes.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, as I've said, I kind of am a little iffy about the new RSV, but I do like that tradition, the English Revised Version, the Revised Standard, the American Standard, the New American Standard, etc. And these annotated Bibles, They have a lot of good information in them, but it's almost like the difference between the translations. You might want to compare annotations from different editions because sometimes they can be pretty idiosyncratic. Like there's this old joke that the Schofield Reference Bible, the favorite of fundamentalists, should be a red letter Bible. Now, real red letter Bibles, as you probably know, have the words of Jesus all printed in red. But the joke here was Schofield's notes should have been printed in red because they're just as important to fundamentalists as the content of the Bible. Well, that's extreme and it's a joke, but yeah, the annotations can really veer off in different directions, which is good. I mean, you want to be able to compare. What does it say in Proverbs? Through a multitude of counselors, wisdom will be established. So, yeah, annotated Bibles are good. The more, the merrier with them, too.
We look at the next one. Paul Kickling. Have you read the Unvarnished Gospels by Andy Goss?
I got it years ago. I've never yet read it. I have a bunch I've not read. One thing I noticed right off the bat was like he's trying to just give you the straight text without any fanciness. Well, I noticed that where it says lawyers or doctors of the law in some translations, he had canon lawyers. And I thought, that's good. I mean, that is a good Christian Roman Catholic equivalent, but I don't know if I'd call that unvarnished. I mean, he's kind of using a rough equivalent, but what the heck? That's all I even had time to notice. I've not read the rest of it yet, and it does seem like a good um, experimental Bible or New Testament or Gospels, right, to read. So and there are various ones that are just the Gospels, and I say any one of them's worth reading. Another favorite of mine is Hugh Schoenfield's Authentic New Testament. And fascinating stuff. He has translation ideas I never thought of, and he might be right. So yeah, I think this is a good one to get and to read too.
Jacob B again. He says, but ultimately, I think the Muslims are right. The only real Bible is the original Hebrew, Greek. What does Dr. Price think? Recommended version.
Well, yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, if you really want to do it right, you would need to master the languages. And but not everybody has the time or leisure or interest to do that, which is why I think it is good to compare various ones. And my favorites are the most literal, the closest to the text, like the RSV and NASB. Not too thrilled about the New International, though I used to like it. I think they're kind of cheating on some translations to gloss over mistakes in the text, but on the whole, what the heck, the you might say the mega text of the Bible is the way to go. Any and all possible versions of it. But there's certainly that point, you're really reading the real thing if you've got the Greek and the Hebrew, or with the Quran, the Arabic.
Let's take a look at the next one here. Greatest joke says, is Revelations the Apocalypse of John?
Yes, that's right. It drives me nuts. Well, not too nuts. I'm not that much of a neurotic, but when people refer to the book of Revelations, that's not the title. Like, I like that. That sounds even more mysterious than the real title. But yeah, the Revelation of John, the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse of John, it all means the same thing, because apocalypse literally means unveiling. Apo is the pronoun to take away, and calypso, that's the veil. And the calypso is the veiled one. And so the apocalypse is the book of Revelation, and either title is fine.
Okay, we got another one here. Benjamin Bunny Glasser says, what was the original thinking behind sorta collapsing the names of God in translation into God, Lord God, etc., instead of Elohim, Tetragrammaton, etc.?
I think it all goes back to the rabbinic anxiety over what it meant not to take the name of Yahweh your God in vain. We were pretty sure that that commandment intended that you not swear falsely in court, because we have a couple of instances of this in the Old Testament where Achan or this one or that one is on trial, and the interrogator says, "Give glory to Yahweh. Did you do so and so?" And the person on trial, if he wasn't perjuring himself, would say, "As Yahweh lives, I did not do it," or "I did do it," whatever you're affirming. And because the idea is, what's the truest thing there is? Well, that Yahweh is the living God. So you are invoking the name of God, and you better not do it and lie. Similarly, breach of contract would have been a way of taking it in vain, because when you made your agreement, like you're a contractor and you say, okay, I'm going to have your new house built by so and so date and under this cost, okay, and we shake hands on it. Well, you would say, as Yahweh lives, it'll be done by so and so and come in under so and so price. Well, in that case, you damn well better do it. You better not say, gee, I'm sorry, I just didn't feel like doing it today. This is kind of common in Vedic religion. Mithras was the guarantor of pacts and contracts. Or in Genesis, where Laban and Jacob make an agreement, I think it's Jacob that says, "May Yahweh watch between you and me as we go our separate ways." That is, make sure you uphold your end of the deal, because God will see what you do and what I do. Well, so these would all be ways of invoking God. And if you welched or lied or whatever, you were in big trouble. Now, what anybody would do, I'm not sure if it says, it has this implicit thing that you're, is this right? Do not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain, that your days may be long upon the land which Yahweh your God gives you. Okay, what they would do, would they just say, well, God is going to get you, or would there be a penalty that the authorities would level? I don't happen to know. But these seem definitely to have been intended, but there were some other possibilities, like, what about taking the name of God as a conjuration? Can I do a magic formula in the name of Yahweh? Or like when Jesus is accused of binding the power of Beelzebul to force him to cough up his captives. How would he have done that? Well, we've got a lot of ancient magic texts. You would invoke Yahweh or Yahweh Sabaoth or whatever to bind the power of the demon and force him, arm twist him into doing the right thing. Does that count? I mean, that looks a little shady in a way. Is that legit? And then you get on into, like, in the life of Brian, where this guy's about to be stoned to death for taking the name in vain. And he says, but all I said was, this halibut is good enough for Jehovah. And everybody gasps in horror. Oh, there you go. You've said it again. Well, that's a frivolous statement, but the guy is not trying to offend anybody. He's just saying to his wife, wow, you did such a great job. I wouldn't hesitate to give this to God. But so there were all these iffy things, and the rabbis decided, look, I'd rather be safe than sorry. What say we ban ever using the name. I know the commandment doesn't actually say that, but if we abstain completely from using the name, we don't have anything to worry about. Now, I know it says it all over the Bible, right? What if you're reading in synagogue from the Bible? Well, they would have a little sign or an asterisk in the text when it said Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name, to alert the lay reader to say, oops, Lord, or Adonai in Hebrew, which was also sort of used as a name for God, but it was more generic. And this passed on into English Bibles, where they just will not put Yahweh in there. They'll have the word Lord with all caps, and that's, again, just to carry on the tradition. Now, if it says the Lord Yahweh in the original, then what you'll have is Lord in regular capitalization, and instead of Yahweh, it'll be God in all caps, which reflects Elohim in Hebrew. Again, you could say Elohim because it was more of a generic term. In fact, Elohim is a plural ending, meaning gods. So there was less controversy and less danger from a theological standpoint. And I'm sure that is why English translations just kept up the tradition. And well, it's not even in our own language. What the heck? Why not just follow their rule? Who's going to lose anything? It's not as if the rest of it's in Hebrew. Now the American Standard Bible had Jehovah. They decided, oh, let's use the actual name. We're writing for Christians, not Jews in the first instance. But they kind of got that messed up because they were getting the name of God from German scholarship that used it. But like in the Jerusalem Bible today, you will find the transliterated Yahweh spelled Yahweh. But this, and that's how the German scholars would have spelled it, but you pronounce these consonants differently in German than in English. So when you, like if I say Jawohl, yes, indeed, it's spelled Jawhohl. Is this true? Yeah. Yes. It's a J, but we pronounce it as a Y. Well, they would pronounce it as a Y. And the same thing with W's. They're pronounced as a V. And so Jehovah is a kind of a mixed up German-English hybrid. It attempts to convey the four-letter name, but kind of messes it up. But more and more Bible translations do just go ahead and use the actual names. That's way more than you wanted to know, I'm sure.
We got a couple more super chats to go through here. Paul Kickling, my personal favorite New Testament, apart from yours, is the Disciples' Literal New Testament, DLNT. I love the way it calls the apostles as one.
I'm not familiar with that. You mean instead of the word the apostles, it speaks of them as one character? Or I'm not sure I get that. I'll have to take a look at that New Testament. I'm not familiar with it.
The next one is Paul Kickling again. Like they are parts of the Christian Christ consciousness, Christ literally passing over into the apostles to ensure the full insemination of Christianity.
Oh, fascinating. I'll have to read this. I'm not familiar with it. Thanks for mentioning that.
When you look at Marcion's collection of Paul's letters, Why do you think they're so shorter? Did Marcion make them smaller, or did Marcion have the original letters, and what happened is Paul's letters are heavily redacted later?
I think the latter. It seems to me, and in fact, there. Once you have that in mind as a possibility, and you start reading through them, you begin to think, I really got to wonder if so and so was really in there. My favorite example would be in Galatians. Did it originally say that when the time was fully come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under law? Why would you spend the ink saying that this guy had a mother? Like, what? It seems superfluous until you think, well, wait a minute. According to Marcion, Jesus wasn't born. He descended from heaven in an adult bodily form. That makes me wonder if someone has added that phrase, born of a woman, to try to head off Marcionite Christology. And that wouldn't be the only instance of it. Or in First Corinthians, there's a number of places where it looks like, wait a minute, how can Paul say this if he said the opposite a couple of chapters earlier? Did he really write all of this? I mean, it looks like somebody has added what he thought were corrections and so on. So I tend to think, yeah, the originals were shorter, and that as they circulated, if you weren't a Marcionite, but you did see value in these letters, you'd say, I hate to throw the baby out with the baptismal water. Maybe I can do something to kind of fix this so it doesn't sound so heretical. And I think that is what happened, just like with what we have as the Gospel of Luke. It looks like the Marcionite Gospel was shorter, and that what is in canonical Luke that wasn't in there was added by Polycarp or other anti-Marcionites. So who knows, right? But I think there's a real good case to be made that the originals, both the gospel and those epistles, were shorter.
Do these shorter Pauline epistles, are they found in manuscripts from Marcion, or are they found in quotations of Marcion's Pauline corpus by the fathers?
Oh boy, I don't happen to know. I'm ashamed to say I don't. Because like we don't have a copy of the Marcionite gospel, we can kind of reconstruct it because there are so many notes from people who didn't like it to say, well, what kind of a gospel is this? He must have cut this out and that out because it's not he didn't have it. I mean, they were reading a copy, but they didn't pass it down to us. But there's so many places where they noted what was missing from Marcion. They figure, oh yeah, he scissored this out. It's probably the same with the epistles. I doubt that we actually have any copies, but we have running commentaries. Hey, why doesn't Marcion have this? And an interesting thing that Hermann Dettering pointed out once was that you would expect if the epistles were originally Marcionite, that they would not have quotations from the Old Testament. But Dettering said, actually, they do, but it doesn't say that's where they're from. It just quotes them like as if it was, somebody said this, or possibly scripture. I don't know. I haven't seen the patristic sources for this, but he did the Marcionite canon in the earliest form we know did have, I believe, all the epistles in some form except for First and Second Timothy and Titus, which appear to have been written against Marcion and against the Gnostics. I believe he even had Philemon, Though I almost think I read recently that perhaps he didn't. Of course, that's so short it could get lost in the shuffle easily.
Another super chat, Paul Kickling. It's on Bible Gateway. It's by Michael McGill.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like Bible Gateway. Comes in mighty handy.
Paul Kickling again. Do you know Thomas J.J. Altizer? In my opinion, he is one of the most important Christian philosophers ever. Self-annihilation of God is online, one of his best.
I was very, very fortunate to know Thomas Altizer. I met him once at an SBL meeting when we were both down in the subway, and he was asking me, "Does this line take you somewhere?" And I said, "Yeah, it does." But it was many years before I began corresponding with him, and I became a fan of his early on. And even when I disagreed with him, I read the Gospel of Christian Atheism and I realized this is an amazing work. And it wasn't too many years before I began to embrace the death of God theology, especially his, though I like Paul Van Buren, William Hamilton, and Gabriel Vahanian, whom I also I met Van Buren once when he spoke. I was acquainted with Gabriel Vahanian, but Altizer, he was the one that influenced me the most. And once I learned about deconstruction, I realized how this fits so well with the death of God theology. And so I did a collection of my sermons called Preaching Deconstruction, where I said it's like sermons informed by the thought of Thomas J.J. Altizer and Jacques Derrida. And I was thrilled when Tom Altizer agreed to write a preface for it. And he said something like that this was the only attempt he had ever seen to do pastoral work based on deconstruction. And you are right. This guy was a polymath. He had mystical experiences, a voluminous encyclopedic knowledge of literature and philosophy and how it all worked together as revelation. There'll never be another one like him, I'm afraid. And I am proud to be one of those that tries to keep his banner held aloft. I'm glad you are too.
Why was Paul's letters so heavily redacted in the late second century and beyond? Were they heavily edited because they were trying to make it look like that Paul's letters were written earlier, or was it for theological reasons, or both?
I think the latter. I believe they were trying to sanitize them because the you find a huge silence in the second century up until Tertullian and Irenaeus. At the end of it, you find a big silence about Paul. It's amazing how you would expect to find the Pauline letters mentioned hither and yon. But even in works like the Acts of Paul and the Apocalypse of Paul and so forth, you don't find any mention of the letters, apparently. In patristic citations, they know about Paul as a martyr, but that's about it. The references to Pauline epistles are odd and confused, as if the writers like First Clement and other ones are not really familiar with the letters. And it's probably because they weren't. And the reason for that is they were real familiar to Marcionites, and they were part of the Marcionite New Testament. And Marcionism was succeeding like wildfire all over the empire. And this convinced Polycarp and others to, like, if you can't beat them, co-opt them. And they said, look, there is a lot of attractive stuff in the Pauline material and the gospel this guy uses. There's no doubt of that. You can see why people like it, but there is that heresy in there too. I bet, maybe he's got something there, adding a Christian scripture to the Old Testament. He wants to replace the Old Testament, right? He says it's a scripture of another religion. It's not ours, but this is these epistles and this gospel. Polycarp and the others said, okay, we don't have to junk the Old Testament, but why not have them both? We can kind of harmonize them. And so what are you going to do with the stuff you don't like in the Marcionite scriptures? Well, let's start editing them to, which was kind of common in the ancient world. If a writing was very widely known and authoritative, you had certain limitations as to how far you could change it. And so often scribes would simply add something to contradict what they didn't like, so as to sort of tell the reader, I know what you think you just read, but don't be confused. Here's what he really meant. And you find that, as Bultmann pointed out, plainly all over the Gospel of John, where Jesus says one thing and then, wow, and then the very next verse, oh, well, I didn't exactly mean that. And so they felt they had to do that with Paul. And Winsome Monroe is great in her book, Authority in Paul and Peter, the discovery of a pastoral stratum in First Peter and the Pauline epistles. And she sets out her criteria for determining these orthodox Catholicizing interpolations. They sound like the practical advice in the pastoral epistles. They're written in the same style. They have the same sort of anachronistic vocabulary. They have more in common with the apostolic fathers than with the other epistles with Paul's name on them. They are more socially conservative, like this is the Paul that tells you to pay your taxes to Rome and things like that. This is the Paul that says women should keep their mouths shut in church, et cetera, et cetera. She says you can tell if you look at it closely that someone is domesticating Paul. And it's not hard to figure out who done it and why. It's a very eye-opening book. And so they felt like if we want our people, good Catholic Christians, to be reading these letters, we better make sure they're safe. We better disarm them first. And that appears to be the nature of the changes that were made. Paul is kind of momentarily puzzling, but then you say, I see. He's not that radical after all. And it worked, right? People decided, hey, I like this. We've got a bigger Bible than ever. And so and then Tertullian and the others, Justin Martyr, took this tack saying, we had the original version. That nut Marcion clipped out stuff he didn't like. But in fact, it was just the other way around.
We got some super chats here. Paul Kickling again. In my opinion, in Altizer's theology, you can find the syncretization between orthodoxy and Gnosticism and general Christian mysticism. And they answered Nietzsche perfectly.
I agree with you. I think he really does, because there is a lot in common between orthodoxy and the insight of Gnostics that saw it a different way but didn't just dump it. Like a classic case would be the atonement and the resurrection. Altizer says to think that Jesus died to eradicate sins and their penalty. And oh, what a tragedy, though. But he came back to life 3 days later. What? That's like Docetism. Can you really even say he died? if we say, oh, Martin Luther King, what a tragedy, he was cut down. Of course, that is what we say. That's what we think, because he didn't come back, right? That's the last we'll see of him. And he was such a great man. Altizer says that, if Jesus came right back, where he left off, what is the point of that? He says there's got to be a deeper gnosis, you might say, as to that doctrine. He says what really happened was, and how does he know this? Well, mystical intuition on Altizer's part, and it's reflected in William Blake and Nietzsche and others. He says what happened was the transcendent poured itself out into the profane on the cross that day, so that when we say God died, he did, and in the strongest possible sense. There is no transcendent God. So Nietzsche was right about the death of God. And where can we find the sacred? Well, exactly as in Derrida and deconstruction, in the kind of witch fire radiance of the profane. Where is Christian work done? In the depths of human suffering and profanation. As Don Cupid, who kind of joined the same train some years later, said that the kind of Christianity he thinks is called for is Christian in form, but Buddhist in essence. Because, as Altizer says, the resultant Christian gnosis is like Mahayana Buddhism. Traditional Hinayana Buddhists felt we must flee the world of illusion and suffering, samsara, to take refuge in nirvana, where all suffering is extinguished. But Mahayana Buddhism said, no, you have not overcome egoism. You're trying to save your own skin, so to speak, to end suffering. What did the Buddha do once he was enlightened? Did he just say, okay, I'm out of here, good luck to the rest of you? No. Mara, the tempter, tried to get him to do that, but he wouldn't do it. He said, no, I got to take this to humanity and their suffering, to end human suffering. Well, so the Mahayana Buddhists said, you know what you have to do then? You have to discover that nirvana within samsara. That's the only place you're going to find it. It's a kind of a strange antimatter universe sacramentalism. And I just find this dazzlingly brilliant. And it does seem to me he is melding together Nietzsche, Gnosticism, Buddhism, etc., in an incredible way. He deserves a lot more attention than he's getting in these days, when supposed left-wing theology has just become politically correct green politics. That's just what a cheat, what a waste. Altizer, he's really the postmodern prophet, in my opinion.
We got another question. Paul Kickling again. He says, shows how the evil side of dualism is part of the logos, logical system of reality, healing the fanaticism of some Gnostic, Zoroastrian, Buddhist sects.
Yeah, you can't banish half of reality. Jung explained why the shadow is just as much a part of the psyche as the persona. If you try to eradicate the shadow, you're going to engage in what Freud called reaction formation and projection. You're going to be denouncing people for the sins you see in them that you cannot bear to see in yourself. You're going to see people that disagree with you as enemies to be destroyed, which is, the great sin of dogmatic religions. But you have to instead, now you may be dining with the devil with a long spoon, but you'd better do that, because if you refuse to admit that he's in there, He's coming out, and you're going to be pretty surprised when he does and destroys you. So again, I think he was right, and he, of course, he wasn't the only one to say it. Like Buddhists and a lot of these people have this insight, but Altizer uniquely, I think, brought these things together so they can shed light and darkness on each other.
Look at the next one here. The King Below. No question, but thank you for giving Dr. Price a platform.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Gollum1, thank you for the $20. I thank all the prior super chats. Really appreciate it. Helps keep this channel going.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the moment, we don't have any other super chats for right now. So here's another question from me. What did Paul's letters look like before Marcion?
Well, it depends on whether he started the ball rolling writing these letters. And even among those who think he had the original versions, you've got some people that say he was the first collector of the Pauline epistles, and others that say no, he started writing them or maybe wrote the whole bunch. I know I have read all those theories, and that would mean, however, that they did look a bit different, that there would have been less of certain material in there. You wouldn't have had the pastorals, obviously. It's not clear to me that you would even have had the Thessalonian letters in there. But there, at some point, they surfaced in some form and were amenable to Marcionism. Colossians strikes me as sort of, you might say, elementary Valentinian Gnosticism. It doesn't get as complex as the Valentinian system did, but I don't see anything in there that wouldn't qualify as straight Gnosticism. Now, was Marcionism and Gnosticism weren't the same thing, though there may have been a secret side to Marcionism that was not blabbed about, and who knows, like the Bishop Esnik in Armenia said that there was a secret dimension of Marcionism, but he doesn't tell us what it was, so who knows how Gnostic it might have been. But it's possible that there was Simonian material in there. I suspect that there's a part of Romans that could easily be understood as the work of Simon Magus, but that it's been added to. And I understand Marcionism to be a kind of, as odd as this sounds, a domesticated version of Simonianism. I go into this in The Amazing Colossal Apostle, that Marcionism is not quite as radical as Simonianism, but looks like a somewhat accommodated form of it. But who knows? I mean, it's really a bunch of called mysteries for good reason, and we have to just reconstruct what we can of them.
Are you saying that there basically was no Pauline corpus before Marcion?
Well, I don't know. It occurs to me that if Simon Magus was Paul and he wrote things as supposedly he did, like the Great Declaration or however you want to translate it, he wrote other things, epistolary literature that would set forth the kind of doctrine of grace that Irenaeus attributed to him. We could have some Simonian material in the canonical New Testament. Whether its first propagators would have called it Pauline material, I don't know, but certainly there's this snowball effect where various items are added and are adopted as Pauline as the snowball continues to roll. So there might have been Marcionite material that was taken up and Paulinized by, putting his name on it. but I don't know that that's settled yet or how it might be settled, because it depends on a pretty complex bit of surgery that has to remain speculative, probably.
Paul Kickling, thank you for another super chat. Dr. Price, may I recommend Valentin Tumberg's Meditations on the Torah, Turret, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism? Tumberg himself was a Roman Catholic.
My wife Carol may have that book. I'll have to take a look. Yeah, it sounds interesting. Thank you. Meditations on the Tarot. Okay.
If you had to pick which pieces of Paul's letters did Simon Magus write, what did he write?
It seems to me that there is some of the material, like before chapter 6, maybe, of Romans. The stuff in Galatians about how God didn't give the law, because if it had been one giver, there wouldn't have been any need for a mediator, but there was, and that was Moses. That kind of squares with Simon's idea that the law was promulgated by angels who wrote it, and the role of the archons in First Corinthians could possibly be Simonian, but it's in the same ballpark, so it's tough to say. But those would be the things that jump out at me: the angelic element, and some of the stuff in Ephesians about how marriage is really a heavenly reality, merely reflected on earth. That kind of reminds me of Simon's redemptive mission to redeem Helen, who was the ennoia, the first thought of God. But it's hard to say. But that's where I would start looking.
So basically, how many chapters would that be of the 13 Pauline epistles? How many of them did Simon Magus write?
Oh, boy. Probably not many. Like the spiritual gifts thing, that and speaking in tongues we associate with Simon at once one remove, because we're told that Marcus the magician, his disciple, was specialized in teaching people to speak in tongues. And that's kind of associated indirectly with Marcion in the book of Acts. And so that wouldn't surprise me as being Simonian. Possibly some of the Encretite subtext in 1 Corinthians 7, as Dennis MacDonald pointed out in his book, The Legend and the Apostle, The Battle for Paul in Story and Canon. It appears that what we're reading in 1 Corinthians 7 is an attempt to counter a real radical Encretite Paulinism. And I suspect Simonianism may have, that would fit the parameters of Encretism, because of this heavenly bridegroom business. That was sort of like an Encretism too. In fact, there's a great book that goes far into this, Love in the Western World, by Denis de Rougemont, where he says he thinks the Western idea of romantic love and ultimately evolved from celibate courtly love, which in turn evolved from Gnosticism with the devotion of the soul to Dame Sophia. And that would really fit Simon Magus and Helena. So I would say that's another possibility. But even there, I admit you're dealing with some echoes. It's hard to, for me as yet anyway, to delineate the specifics, though I do get into that a bit in The Amazing Colossal Apostle, where I have sort of mini commentaries on each writing and try to isolate what stratum comes from what stage of Paulinist evolution.
Do you think the author or authors of the Pauline letters were familiar with the Q document?
I rather doubt it. I'm more inclined to think that if there was any dependence, certain elements from what became the Pauline epistles got recoined as sayings of Jesus at least once Q was Christianized. I tend to go along with Earl Doherty in saying that at least Q1 was not originally a Christian work, that they just said at some point, oh yeah, Jesus said this stuff. I mean, it's not even like in the Gospel of Thomas where it does at least say Jesus says so and so. So I don't take for granted that Q1 was even supposed to be the sayings of Jesus.
And when would Q1 date?
This gets weird too, and I once again I'm showing my crazy side here, as if there was another side to me. There are verbal parallels between early material near the beginning of Fourth Ezra that sounds so much like Q, like the patriarchs and the Gentiles will be together at the table in the Messianic banquet and stuff like that. That sounds like it originated in Fourth Ezra, but wound up in Q somehow. And so and this gets into source criticism, right? Because most scholars think that the early parts I'm referring to in Fourth Ezra really should be denominated Fifth and Sixth Ezra, that they were later Christian add-ons. But I don't know enough about the linguistics to know if that's defensible or not. But it looks to me like some of it originated there and then passed on into Q at some point.
We'll come back to that in a second. We got another super chat from Paul Kickling. Thanks again. You've been really super chatting a lot in this stream. Dr. Price, have you read The Acts of Pilate, especially the second part with Christ's descent into hell? It's on that universal salvation.
The Apokatastasis.
Hope I pronounced that right.
The universal restoration that Origen believed in, that even the devil would be saved. I have read it. Does it actually say Jesus breaks everybody out of Hades, or is it just the Old Testament righteous? That's the way I remember it. I could be wrong though, because he does like trash the place. It's kind of funny actually, somehow. And boy, but I love to know the backstory on this. I believe it's Satan has deposed Beelzebub as the prince of hell, or maybe it's vice versa. It's been too long, but nonetheless, they're working together, and on their alarm system, they see that the crucified Christ is on his way to engineer a prison break, and he comes in and breaks the gates of hell open, and they start quoting one of the Psalms, lift up your heads, O gates, for the King of glory shall come in. And he grabs Adam and everybody else in Isaiah by the hand and leads them on high, a la Ephesians. And I guess like Satan and Beelzebub are left holding the bag. but I don't remember if it says it's just the righteous of Israel that have had to wait this long, or if everybody is saved. I got to go take another look at that. I know there's several different versions of this. The Acts of Pilate and the Gospel of Nicodemus themselves are variant versions, but I know there are different language versions of each one. And one of them, one version of the Gospel of Nicodemus, tells us who the 500 brethren were who were mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15. They were the guards at the tomb from Matthew who fell asleep and were fainted dead away at the coming of the angel, but that the 500 troops heard that Jesus resurrected had been spotted in Galilee, so they went up there hoping to get a last glimpse of him alive, which they did get. They got there just in time to see him ascend into heaven, and they brought this report back to Pilate. But this is only in one version of the Gospel of Nicodemus. So there are probably various versions of it I've not read, and I'm not sure if any of them actually has universal salvation.
We got another one here from the Muslim apologist. Thank you for the super chat. He says, "Greetings, Dr. Price."
Back to you. Greetings to you.
Did I actually cut you off there when I was answering a super chat?
Though if you had, look, somebody's got to do it, right? So don't worry about it. But no, you didn't.
So basically, you do think there might have been a Pauline corpus prior to Marcion, but it was extremely, even far more tinier than what we see in Marcion's collection.
Yeah, that would make sense, because if they already existed in some form, who would have been more likely to be interested in collecting them? It seems to me that Marcion would be the best candidate, though there have been others suggested, like Edgar J. Goodspeed thought that Onesimus, the protege of Paul in Philemon, that he was, Ignatius mentions him as a bishop years later, and so maybe Onesimus was forgiven and went on to become a bishop, and he was so grateful to Paul, Goodspeed reasoned, that once Paul was dead, he decided to preserve his teaching by collecting these letters. Goodspeed's student, Ronald Knox, didn't really think that. He kind of liked some of the theory, but he suggested that Marcion was the one that collected them, which seems a bit more likely to me, but Goodspeed's theory is pretty good too. My voice is kind of wearing out. I should probably get going, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sure. No problem. We can always continue this another time. There's, in your book, the Pre-Nicene New Testament, we could do several shows just on that. There's a lot of material in there.
That'd be fun, yeah.
I want to take a moment to thank everybody for super chatting once again in this stream. Definitely a lot of super chats that came in today, and I really appreciate it. I really do. Helps me continue this work. And I thank everybody else that participated in the live chat discourse, and I'll see all of you later.
Yay.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.